The action takes place in 2019, 10 years after humanity faced an epidemic that resulted in 95% of people turning into vampires. From that moment on, everything changed and the population began to lead a nocturnal lifestyle. Sunlight became deadly to these bloodthirsty creatures, so over the past decade, numerous underground passages have been built to allow them to move safely around the city during the day. Even cars have been modified to protect against ultraviolet radiation. All of this was done to ensure that this new form of life could exist comfortably in the old world and to suppress the instincts of predators. Vampires began to consume human blood, which helped them control their thoughts and actions. Those who survived were forced to hide, otherwise they would inevitably become powerless donors. Meanwhile, another crisis is brewing in the world, as blood supplies are dwindling and many vampires are mutating into terrible monsters. The central character of the story is a man named Edward, who works for a large company and tries every day to create an artificial substitute for human blood. He is different from the other vampires, as he does not feed on human blood. Soon, Edward is summoned to a closed meeting of the administration, where he learns about the results of an experiment. He is then locked up in a death row cell and chosen as a test subject to study changes in his body due to blood hunger. Gradually, he begins to change. His ears lengthen like those of a bat, and his mental and speech functions begin to deteriorate. The search for a blood substitute becomes urgent, as vampire supplies will only last until the end of the month. Edward's boss, Charles, tells him a story about his daughter who refused to be turned into a vampire many years ago. He understands that his subordinate has compassion for humans, but deep down does not share Edward's opinion. Charles asks him to speed up the search for a blood analog, which Edward tells his colleague about. The day of testing arrives, and the vampire is injected with synthetic blood that has previously been tested on monkeys. Within seconds, the man's body temperature rises, and he begins to convulse and break out in blisters. Edward administers a drug that quickly relieves the symptoms, but the test subject explodes. On his way home, Edward accidentally notices that his ears have lengthened like those of the death row inmate who turned into a monster due to blood starvation. At that moment, he does not notice an oncoming car and crashes into a barrier. He approaches the car to check if the passengers are okay and sees a woman and her friends. He notices their eyes and realizes that they are not vampires, but humans. The police siren sounds, and the doctor offers to hide the injured passengers in his car. Due to lack of other options, the group agrees. While Edward talks to the patrol inspectors, he points them in the wrong direction to mislead them. Audrey finds a pass in the car and learns something. The stranger works at a medical clinic, and when the danger passed, people fled. Edward headed home, but he soon hears a security alert and realizes that someone has entered his home uninvited. It turns out to be his younger brother Frankie, who brought a bottle of real blood as a birthday present. However, Edward refuses to drink it. Frankie works for the military and captures people whom he brings to vampires to get the necessary amount of blood. The brothers begin to argue, and Edward pours the gift down the drain. Frankie is upset by the actions of his close relative and throws the glass of blood against the wall. After a while, a mutated vampire appears in the house, which society calls degenerates. It looks like a monster in the form of a bat and is no longer able to control itself. The creature attacks Edward, but Frankie manages to strike a fatal blow to the monster. Soon, the police arrive, and upon examining the body, they find an engagement ring with an engraving that allows the heroes to learn about the dead gardener. Later, Edward hears another security alert and goes to check the door where he notices Audrey. The girl asks for his help and gives him an invitation note. Meanwhile, Frankie overhears their conversation, but Edward decides not to answer his questions until the next day. The heroes go to Charles, who asks the boss to guarantee that the synthetic analog will completely replace real blood and that people will be safe. However, the boss tries to explain that most of the population will undoubtedly switch to artificial blood, but some will be willing to pay more for the real thing. Soon, Edward meets with Elvis, who tells him how he managed to become human again after being a vampire for many years. He was driving at high speed without fresh blood, and his mental abilities began to fade, causing him to crash into a barrier and fly under the scorching sun. A few seconds later, the man fell into the water and emerged as a human. The heroes notice Frankie, who followed his brother and intends to send his relatives to prison, which leads to a fight resulting in Frankie receiving a burn. The group escapes, and the police start chasing them. However, the sun protection system in the hematologist's car fails, and Elvis has to take the wheel. They decide to take a risk and drive across an abandoned bridge, which fortunately withstands their car. The pursuers suffer, and the team arrives at Audrey's mansion, where they bring all the refugees. Here, Edward sees a senator who knows many vampires seeking healing. Soon, Audrey's friends go in search of people whom they intend to bring to her mansion. However, they fall into a trap, which the heroes learn from a young girl named Allison. Everyone begins to gather because the military is about to arrive at the shelter and take everyone who can give blood. However, Edward decides to stay and conduct an experiment. He has come up with a way to create a controlled sunburn that will help recreate the conditions under which Elvis was healed. Audrey and her friend decide to stay with the hematologist and help him. After several attempts, Edward manages to bring his idea to life, and he becomes human. Meanwhile, Allison ends up in Charles' office, and she is his daughter. The man had previously told his subordinate about the long-awaited meeting that did not go as smoothly as he had hoped. Because of this, he decided to talk to Frankie to get his daughter back. The soldier obeyed the order and went to the girl's cell, where he bit her, thus starting the transformation process. In the world, chaos begins as a shortage of blood causes many vampires to turn into degenerates. Therefore, it was decided to send troops to clear the cities. They catch monsters and chain them up before publicly exposing them to the sun, where they burn to ashes in a matter of seconds. Audrey, Elvis, and Edward arrive at the place where the other people were supposed to wait out the attack by the soldiers. However, all their friends are already dead. The hematologist wants to ask for help from his colleague, and he is sure that his friend will definitely help him. However, when they arrived at his house, they realize that the man had betrayed them to the soldiers. Audrey is taken captive, and Edward and Elvis manage to escape. The partners hide in an abandoned building where they are attacked by a degenerate. However, Frankie appears and kills it. He notices that his brother has become human, and after biting Elvis, he becomes a vampire again in a matter of seconds. Edward does not. The relative's idea inspires the heroes, and they go to Charles to provoke the boss to bite him. But this time, it's not him who turns, but the boss, as the blood of a healed vampire can cure the illness of other nocturnal creatures. The doctor frees Audrey and escapes, but not before tying up Charles and sending him to the soldiers for a facelift. When the troops see that the boss has become human, they don't attack him and kill the others. The group manages to reach the lobby where they are met by an armed army. Frankie appears and saves Dr. Audrey, but soon after, the reinforcements arrive and Frankie's younger brother dies. Within seconds, vampires who drink Frankie's blood turn into humans, and other vampires start killing them off. Gradually, anyone who tries the healed blood becomes human.